everyone, and welcome to How to Make Data Talks Less Stressful, featuring Nita Creekmore. For today's presentation, you will receive a certificate of attendance. This certificate of attendance will be emailed to you within a week, so please check your inbox. And there will be prizes. There is no need to register. The winners are chosen from those who watch this video live. Look for an email to see if you are a winner. And now I'd like to turn it over to Nita and let the learning begin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining ESGI's webinar, me chatting with you about data talks and how to make data talks less stressful. So before we get started, I definitely want to just tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Nita Creekmore, and I am an instructional coach. I've been in education for about 19 years now. I can't even believe that I'm even saying 19 years. That seems like an eternity, but definitely been in education for 19 years, 13 of which I was in the classroom, a K-5 classroom teacher. I've done first grade, second grade, dabbled in third and fourth and fifth grade. And I became an instructional coach after 13 years of being in the classroom, which is so like, it's just something that fell in my lap. And it was so, I don't know, I loved coaching. I loved teaching. And I love doing what I do now, which is consulting and presenting to you. So that's what I do now. I have my business, Love, Teach, Bless, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And I'm definitely an instructional coach consultant, but I also present for Bright Morning Consulting as well as a full-time job too. So love what I do each and every day. You also see a picture of my beautiful family. I have 4 children and a wonderful husband, 4 amazing kiddos from ages 19, 17, 15, and then also 9. So I just have a plethora of like teenagers and my 9-year-old. And then my husband, Michael, who is also a school counselor as well. Then you'll see my family again. My huge family. I have my nieces there, my kids, my mom, my sister, my brother-in-law. And so you see all of us there at the beach. And then you see me dancing. And I also present for Get Your Teach On too, Get Your Lead On side. And so love what I do. My core values, if you can see in the pictures, are authenticity, joy, and connection. And so hopefully you see that through my pictures and also through today and what we do. So we're going to be talking about data talks, how to make data talks less stressful. And I know that topic is like, yeah, how? Like, Nita, when are you going to tell us all the things? I'm going to say this ahead of time. I don't know all the things. I just know what has worked for me in my 19 years in education and talking about data and thinking about data, what works, what doesn't. And so hopefully this helps you a little bit in relieving some of that stress that comes in this part of the year. And so let's think about what causes stress, right? What causes the stress in data talks? Think about who causes the stress or where does the stress come from? So take a moment to just think about what causes this angst, this stress that continues to like build and build when we talk about data, or even the word data is mentioned. Think about that for a second. And I'm going to talk about this. The ultimate bad word is the D word, data in education. I don't know what it is about educators. When we hear that word, we're like, oh, data. And how did data become a bad word, right? Well, a couple of reasons that came to mind for me was one, and I'll start from the bottom up. We have built an obsessive data culture. Like it's been so obsessive in the sense of like putting this like punitive feeling on data where it should be punitive towards educators. And that is going to cause some stress. That's going to cause some angst, right? Data often tends to be looked at through an inequitable lens, right? And so we look at instead of asset-based data in the sense of like what the kids can do in their growth, sometimes we look at it from an inequitable lens in the sense of like, what can't they do? Or sometimes what plagued me was like, we're already saying what they can't do before they even have taken this test at the end of the year, this big, huge test at the end of the year that we're building up towards all year, right? And you've already said that they can't do it. And so those are the things that like data tends to be looked at from this inequitable lens. Like we're not looking at it like every student every day. We're looking at it like some students every day. And so that can cause some like angst or feelings about data that's not pleasant always. And then also data collections are often lagging data, especially like the data collection we talked about, like standardized testing at the end of the year. And so that is lagging data to me. That's like old data. So like that data is like, okay, they had this big test and then the kids are all stressed out about it. The educators are all stressed out about it. And then like we have this test and then it's done and that's it. And a lot of times we talk about the data like that year and then the following year, it's like done. We don't talk about it. We don't go back to it. It's over. And so by that time, after the summer's done, the data's old. We need data right now. We need to be helping our kids right now. And so I think that's when data has become built up over the years, a bad word. You know, it's become a bad word. And so here's some questions that you can either write down, take a picture of, think about. Is the first one is like, what do we want our data to do and tell us? And that's an important question when you're thinking about data, right? What do I want the data to ultimately tell me and do for my students and for myself as an educator? That's the first question. The next question is, how do I want to feel before and after looking at data, right? So sometimes when I collect data, I'm like, oh, I really want to know like what happened, like especially if it's like a assessment or the end of the unit test or some like mid-year benchmark or whatever. I want to see because I feel like it's an expression or something that says something about me as a teacher. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But then like, I want to feel at ... Write that down. I almost said it for you because I almost started getting really into like the question. Next one is like, what do we want our data talks that we have together to feel like? Because before we have the talks, we look at our own individual data, right? We have feelings about that. Good or the feelings that are there. I feel like emotions are neither good nor bad. So like we have all these emotions there. And then what do we want our data talks to feel like once we come to the table together? What do you want them to feel like? So think about those questions for yourself before we dig in. And most importantly, like how do we want our students to feel when we're having data talks? When I talk about data talks, I'm talking about educators having data talks. What about even our data talks with our students? We're showing them their growth, showing them all the learning that they have done, or showing them all the learning that we want them to do, or they can tell us where they want to go, right? So how do we want our students to feel when we talk about data? So let's chat about this. Let's have a conversation. Think about this. I'm going to be very, very like interactive in this and pausing and thinking of like, what are some ways that we can do this differently? The first thing I'm going to say is let's think about the purpose. Think about what is the ultimate purpose behind collecting data. And here are some things from my 19 years in education that I've come up with. We want to have data because we want our students to grow and thrive, right? It helps us to see where they are, where they've been, where they're going. We want them to grow and thrive. Next is we want to build learners every day, not just learners to take a test, right? Not just learners to get this score on the standardized test. We want learners every day. We want to build these learners every day and build this joy within them for our students to want to learn, to want to grow, right? Every single day. And the last one is like, we want to continue our teaching and continue the students' learning. And that's why we collect data, to drive our teaching, to drive the students' learning there in our everyday situations, our day-to-day, right? The students are our purpose. This picture makes me smile. They're like hugging each other and they're so happy and they're just like, okay, they want to thrive, they want to learn, they want to grow. And data helps us to do that. We have to have the data there. So we think about the purpose of our data talks. think about these things. Like, why do we have data talks? Like, and I'm not talking about the punitive data talks that like the data is like put in front of you and everyone's like, oh, first grade did this. Oh, third grade did this, right? And looking at it from a like, not an asset-based lens, but definitely like deficit mindset, right? I'm talking about the data talks that do this. They collaborate and discuss data collectively, where you're learning and growing together as a team. I'm talking about where you're building a community that looks like data as fluid. This is what we do every single day. The data is like the thread in and out. We're collecting data when our students walk in the classroom. We're collecting data when we're observing our students. And I'm getting ahead of myself here, but these are some things that we do. But then the question is like, how do we relieve the stress around that big D word? How do we relieve that stress? What do we do? So I'm going to talk about 5 ways to relieve the stress. I'm going to talk about 5 ways to relieve the stress. The first one is so incredibly important. Folks must feel a sense of safety when having these data talks. And so when I say safety, I'm talking about I need to feel safe enough in this group in order to be able to talk about my data in a way that I can be vulnerable, I can be honest, I can be open, and I can be secure in what I've already done with my students. And so we have to cultivate a safe space for this to happen. If we don't cultivate this safe space, folks are going to get quiet when talking about data, right? And then the leader of whoever's leading the data talk or facilitating the data talk will be the only one talking because no one feels safe. And I saw a quote once that says like, when everyone gets quiet in your building as a leader, be mindful because you want folks to be able to talk and express and communicate and collaborate. And when you hear crickets is when there's probably an issue. And so in order to feel safe when having data talks, you have to do certain things in order to create that safety. And before we reimagine that, which is one of the things, is when thinking about creating that safety, you're thinking about creating a space where it's not punitive, where data is not a sense of like, I'm going to smack you on the hand because you didn't get that. And I'm not saying literally, I'm saying emotionally, figuratively being smacked on the hand. I don't know about you, but that's happened to me before where I'm like, oh, it's mid-year and like my kids haven't made the mark and I'm putting quotes behind that on purpose. And feeling like a sense of like not doing enough or that I didn't do enough, but I saw growth in my students in other ways, right? Other ways that like aren't seen on paper. And so in creating that safe space is having those discussions, bringing out, and I'll go back to my other slide, but bringing out the fact that there might be some angst around that. So bringing emotions into that space to say, yeah, I do realize there may be some angst around the data talks. I do realize there may be some feelings around this and kind of getting that out on the table and creating a space where people feel like their voices are valued, that they're seen, that they're heard, and in a space where their students are seen and heard and valued, and the whole student, right? And continuing the safety, the growth of safety in your community. So if you're leading a team, that's how you would do that. You would continuously talk about how this is not punitive. This is for our students. And our goal is for making sure our students thrive each and every day, that our students grow each and every day. And that can look different in different classrooms, and continuously showing that in your actions, showing that in your discussion, and showing that in the voice that you bring each and every day. Okay. So having those discussions when feeling safe. The second is this. Let's reimagine what data looks and sounds like. A lot of times when we talk about data, we're talking about data, like I said before, that's lagging. Data that's like at the end of the school year that by that time, there's really not much that teacher who was their teacher can do about that. Like it's kind of like that's the end of the year. and they're either celebrating it or they're like, oh, I wish I would have done this, or it's like 1 day of testing. So much can happen in 1 or 2 days of testing. The student can have a stomach ache and like not show up the way that they normally do, right? And so let's reimagine what we talk about when we talk about data, what that can look and sound like. And what does that mean, you may be asking? Reimagine what data looks and sounds like. And here's the thing. Here are some examples. Observe buddy groups, like when you're putting them in pairs, that small group learning, and think about what the student's doing well or how the student has grown, even in their buddy groups, right? So thinking about that, logging that data, that is data. That is data. Having content interviews, talk with your students. Initially, I was going to put on here, like reading interviews or reading conferences, writing conferences. And then my mind started going like, okay, we could have social studies conferences and talk about with the content and have discussion around that. Yes, we can have science content, right? Interviews. Maybe we're doing an experiment together in a small group or individually, right? So those are ways that you can collect data. That's data collection for your students to see how they're learning and thriving and growing. And so talk with your students. I heard on a podcast with Shane Shaffer, she and Jamila Dugan wrote Street Data. And so that's a really, really good book if you don't have that book. But they were talking about how like Chris Emden was on there too, talking about how like when students walk into your classroom, right when they walk into your classroom, that is data. You're looking at how they show up, their way of being, right? So you're thinking about how are they social emotionally? You're thinking there and you're logging that data. Either you're logging it internally or you're writing it down. You are logging data when your kids are, like I just said, are in small groups, or you're having your content interviews, or you're talking with your students. That is data. That is data. You're talking to them about a problem that they're doing in math, how they get to that problem, right? You're having those math conferences, those reading and writing conferences. You're having those social studies and science conferences, and you're integrating the writing into, and that's a whole nother session on integration. But like, you're having these conferences with your students, these interviews, okay? That's data. Another sense of data, and I kind of touched on it just a minute ago, is listen to what isn't being said. That is data. Watching your student. When I first was in school, we used to do a thing called kid watching, and I'm not sure they teach like young students, student educators about kid watching. Kid watching is powerful. We don't talk about it enough and we don't do it enough, and that is data. Kid watching is data. Watching students interact with their peers, watching them in small group, seeing who the leaders are, seeing who the ones who probably could get a little nudge in their confidence and speak up. So that is data, okay? And one thing I'm going to say in all of this, and these are just some examples, is slow down the process. We are in a culture that values urgency. We saw it with the pandemic slowing down, and we were like, oh my gosh, like slow down the process of collecting data. We want like a one and done. No, I want to see a trajectory of my students and their growth. I want to see how they've grown. I want to see the ways in which they've grown. I want to see how they've grown in different levels of their growth, right? In the sense of like social emotionally. How are they internally? How have they grown in getting to know themselves and their identities, and how they've grown in the way of like, maybe they didn't have confidence in math and now they have confidence in math. Maybe they have confidence in their reading and maybe they do now. I want to see that level of growth. And so when I'm thinking about slowing down the process, that may take some time. And sometimes when we're collecting this type of data and reimagining data, you're thinking about, oh, like this test or that test. I'm talking about collecting data that shows your student growth, well-rounded growth, because we want data that tells the whole story, not just a piece of the story, right? We want data that tells the whole story and not just a piece of the story. And so you're probably like, why is she so focused on data? Because we have to get clear on data and what we're collecting in our data before we have our data talks, right? So the next one is I'm going to talk about the 3. make it a collaborative space. So when you have your data talk, make it in a sense that it's a collaborative space. Well, what do you mean in a collaborative space? Well, a lot of times I've been in teams and team meetings where only two people are talking or one person is talking. And I've been on teams where we have thrived in this collaboration of data talks in the sense of like, we're sharing our data and we have a safe enough space and community, right? We value our students, and not just the students in our classroom, but the students in each other's classrooms. And we bring our data to the table. So let's just say we did an assessment on ESGI, right? And we were talking about sight words that we have help our kids like decode, and we're logging, we're thinking about how many sight words they know. And one teacher's students are like, they are getting their sight words, they're decoding their sight words, they're doing all of those things because they've learned those spelling patterns. And I'm like, my students didn't do as well. What did you do in your classroom? Maybe I can try it. And so that's what data talks can do. It can bring the magic into your teaching. It can bring the magic into your teams. And so when you make it a collaborative space, you're sharing information. It's not like, this person is saying they want their students to do above Mrs. Creekmore students or whatever. For us all to do well, we want all of our students to thrive, not just one classroom, not just one group of students. We want every student to thrive every single day. So I may be talking to Miss Clance and say, hey, Miss Clance, like, what did you do in your class for your students to do, like, to really, really like grasp these sight words? And then she'll tell me maybe a strategy she used for her students, or an activity that she showed them to help them really grasp that information. That's the point of data talks. Data talks helps for you to help your students grow. You grow and your students grows, right? It's not like a housing of one person where one person houses all the information and their students are thriving and everyone else is trying to keep up. When they have an activity or a skill or something that they have done or learned how to do, that they can teach the other teachers. That's what makes it magical. And so when you're thinking about a collaborative space, I say collaborative spaces bring the magic. They bring the magic. Absolutely bring the magic. Another thing, the fourth thing I want to talk about is like, there are humans behind the numbers. And so in making a collaborative space, and let's say we collect our data, whether we're using data that we're collecting anecdotally or we're using ESGI and using data that we're pulling from there. Remember, there are humans behind those numbers. And I say this another time because so many times I've been in the midst of data talks where I'm an educator in the classroom and the leader is just focused on the numbers, which I think, okay, fine. I understand that everyone has to get their growth. I understand that. And there's that story I was telling you about. There are humans behind these numbers. And so here's what you can do to remind yourself that there are humans behind these numbers. The first thing is humanize the data collection process. Bring artifacts to your data meetings. To me, that has the student's name on there, maybe not their last name or initials. And you're bringing artifacts there. You're bringing a journal entry that that particular students brought, right? You're bringing a math problem or a math, word problem that they did, and that was like amazing that they did. Because what happens is when you bring these artifacts, you're humanizing the student and you're bringing the whole student over a number, right? You're bringing their writing. You're bringing that to the data talk, not just looking at numbers. And I'm going to say this over and over again. Remember the story of each one of your students. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a story. Each of your students have a story. Your student has a story when they walk into your classroom. But you're collecting data the whole time, right? And listening and learning their story. They're building a story within your classroom, and you're listening and learning to their story. Every student has a story. And so when I say data talks, I'm saying it's up to you to share that story. Yes, we're talking about map data today, but then I'm also bringing in other collections of their work, other writings, other things that they did in their reading where I assess them in their reading, a reading interview that blew you away, right? And so that's the whole person versus relying on one day they take that map data, right? It's not, to me, it's not fair to the student. Does it humanize them? Humanizing them means that, like, yeah, today, this doesn't look like how Johnny would normally perform. But guess what? Maybe he didn't perform well on that computerized test. But maybe when I decided to give him, Johnny, a test from ESGI off of like the letter naming, that Johnny was like, boom, 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 boom. Right? Maybe it's a setting. Maybe it's the computer. Thinking about that. It's a story for each one of your students there. And then I want you to remind yourself that there's a story for yourself as a teacher. Like, everyone has a story, even for yourself as a teacher. And so thinking about, who was I as a teacher when I first began teaching? Who am I now? Thinking about, who was I at the beginning of the year, right? Who am I now as a teacher? How have I grown as a teacher, right? What are some things? Some days I have some great days teaching, and some days not so great, because I'm a human and that happens. And so thinking about remembering the story of yourself as a teacher, thinking about that. Number 5, I'm going to say this. Doesn't always happen in data talks, but it's so important to share your wins and your celebrations. This is so important to do. And I'm going to tell you why, because it is important to share your wins and your celebrations, because so many times you're always feeling like, maybe I'm just talking to myself, but sometimes I felt like it was looked at like as a deficit mindset. When people looked at the data, sometimes they looked at what the kids didn't do versus what they did do. And so share your wins and your celebrations, but I'm going to go ahead of that and say, when you're looking at your data before you enter into the data talk, think about your wins, think about your celebrations before you even dig into areas in which Leslie can grow, areas in which, DeMarcus can grow. Think about, what did DeMarcus do that was amazing, right? What did Leslie do that was amazing? What did Marisol do that was amazing, right? Think about the kids' wins in that. Their wins are your wins. And so when you're thinking about that, when you're thinking about your individual data, do that. And then think about your kids' wins, right? And then share your wins and your celebrations. Make that a part of your data talk. I would even venture to say, begin with your wins and your celebrations. Begin there. Because if you begin there, you're starting your data talk with a sense of safety. The number one that I talked about. When you celebrate your wins and your celebrations, you are beginning with a sense of safety. I would even say in data talks, if you're not over it, say, hey, Mrs. Johnson, can we bring like a cake? Can we bring cupcakes? Can we bring cookies? Can we bring some chocolate? Can we do something to celebrate the fact that, like, our kids are growing and thriving? And so celebrate that. Make it a party. Make it a fun time. Because when data talks are like this doom and gloom, the big D, it's like, here we go, data talk. It doesn't feel good. But when you thread data talks, when I said thread it earlier, thread your data talks throughout what you do, it's fluid. It's not something that's like some big doom and gloom, because you're threading it throughout everything you do, right? You're looking at things through an equity lens. You're looking at things through, how can I make sure that every student is getting what they need every day? You're looking at it through that lens. all the time. And you're looking at your data through multiple sources of data. And so when you do that, you feel good versus like a doom and gloom. It brings a different type of feeling. So share your wins and your celebrations. Be confident in that and celebrate that for yourself. And so think about how all the students have grown, right? Bring that growth there. Because beginning with the growth feels better. It feels better. I'll say that again. Beginning with that growth feels better than putting the data up on a screen and say, everyone look at it. I don't know about you, but that made me feel so anxious, right? Like everyone's going to see my data, whether it's good or not good or whatever, it makes me feel anxious. But if we celebrate the data and how our students have grown, whether they grew like this much or they grew this much, they've grown. And so celebrate that. Another thing that can help to build up the safety in data talks is ending with actionable next steps. That makes you feel better too, right? So ending with those actionable next steps really helps you feel better. And not action steps in a way is like, this is what you need to do. You work together in your data talks, making it a collaborative space, making it a working space, and you coming up with next steps. But I'm going to have you do something further than that. When thinking about in your data talks, how to make it less stressful. You come up with your next steps, like as a team, collaboratively, of like what your next steps are going to be, but also share that with students. Have data interviews with your students. Talk to them about their data. You know, I said you want your students to feel good about those questions at the beginning. Talk to them about your data, and then have them help you come up with actionable steps or agree to the actionable steps you've already come up with. So when I say making data talks less stressful, I'm thinking about those things of making sure that it's safe enough to do that, right? Making sure you reimagine what data can look like when you talk about data. It should be fluid. It should be something that we're doing all the time, whether it's our anecdotal notes or an interview, or we're doing an assessment on ESGI that's like something daily that's intertwined to everything we do, or whether it's us looking at what is not seen. That's data. That is data. So you're doing that, making it a collaborative space where you're working together on your team, right? You're working together on your team, whether it's a team, whether it's your school, whether it's your community, you're working together. You feel like you're in line together, you're aligned, and you are coming up with actionable steps, but you're also celebrating that growth in the midst of that. Okay, celebrating that growth. And so here's a bonus here. There are multiple ways to collect data, and making sure you're collecting that data with ESGI is super important too. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the amazing ways that you can collect data here. And so the first picture is like a picture of you collaborating with others. You have some of your ESGI, reports, but you also have other artifacts. I was going to say anecdotes. No, artifacts that are there too. So you have your ESGI report, you have other artifacts, you have other things from your student that are like showing how they are grasping their letter sounds and their letter naming, and they're getting it, and they're growing and they're growing and they're growing. And then you also have this graph in the middle, right? And they say, okay, this is where she was, this is where she's going, right? Where she could go. And then you show that at the beginning, middle, and end of the year, right? You have that there. But you also have other artifacts that show that too, okay? And then you have like, where you have the actual letters and where they can do the letter sound. And then you have the sight words there for students to practice their sight words after they've learned that spelling pattern or learn how to decode that too. Multiple ways to collect data. Remember that there are so many different ways to collect data. There's so many different ways to think about data talks. And so when you're thinking about the data talks, please take in mind some of the things that I've said. I promise you that it can only help to like relieve some of that stress, versus like going in feeling stressed out and stressful. And if you are a person that leads teams, suggest some of these things to your teammates. Come and experience it differently when you're thinking about data talks. Because when you experience it differently, when you show up differently to your data talks, you'll feel better. You'll feel less stressed. And you'll see like the purpose and the why, because it always goes back to the purpose. It always goes back to the why there in the midst of your data talks there as well. So don't forget this bonus. If you're going to sign up with ESGI, use my code LOVETEACHBLESS, all one word or words put together, love, teach, and bless, so you can get a discount code there as well. And so one thing I want to say is thank you. I want to thank, first of all, ESGI for having me here with y'all, to be able to talk to y'all about data talks, about the purpose of data talks, and how you can reimagine that space where it cannot be a stress-inducing situation, where it could be a situation of thriving and celebration and growth. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Nita Creekmore. So excited to be here with y'all. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter at Love Teach Bless. If you're following me on LinkedIn, it would be Nita Creekmore. So you would follow my name. And you can also scan this QR code on the screen where you can send me an email. You can follow me right away. You can also link to my blog as well to find out more about what I do at Love Teach Bless. And I also put some content out there as well. So thank you for having me. Have a blessed and wonderful evening.
Thank you, Nita, for all that great information today. Thank you for joining ESGI. If you have not tried a 60-day free trial yet, please use promo code LOVETEACHBLESS to start your 60-day free trial. Also, if you'd like to follow ESGI's webinar series, go to our YouTube channel and click ESGI Webinar Series. There you will find all of the recordings from all the previous months. Thank you so much and have a great night.